Welcome to the Political Checkmate, and today I'm going to checkmate Robert Reich's video, The Biggest Economic Lies We're Told. So here we go.
In America, it's expensive just to be alive. And that's not just because of the pandemic. It's because of choices made by some of these, irregular Americans. Just look at how big oil is raking it in while you pay through the nose at the pump. Not sure.
Well, the reason why oil companies are making bigger profits is due to losses in the pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I would also point out how the decades of these oil companies such as BP or Chevron or Shell quarterly gross profits seem skimpy, and the profits seem to decline a bit or not that big of an increase compared to the before in the trend.
About you, but I'll do just about anything to save fuel where I can. Go around. I'm driving slow because I'm saving gas. You don't like it? Go around. Go around. That's on top of the average price of a new non-luxury car, which is now over $44,000. I mean, even accounting for inflation, this is way higher than the average cost when I bought my first car. It's probably in a museum by now.
Well, the price of a modern car depends on what model it is, and you can find a car that is 20 grand or less. I would also point out that this is not really an apples to apples comparison since modern cars are more efficient than luxury cars back in the day, such as GPS and last longer and they are safer.
Even worse, the median price for a house is now over $440,000. Compare that to 1972 when it was under $200,000. Work a full-time minimum wage job? You won't even be able to afford rent on a one-bedroom apartment just about anywhere in the United States.
Well, housing prices depend on what state or region you look at, but the reason why housing costs have increased so much is because of regulations on housing has caused them to increase so much because of reductions in the housing supply, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. Well, for the minimum wage and rent one, you should be comparing the average wage to the average rental cost and minimum wage to minimum rental cost. And also the data comes from the NLIHC, and my response is that you can find a roommate for the apartment. And also with the NLIHC, it finds affordability if you can spend no more than 30% of your income on rent. I would also like to point out that regulation have also increased the cost of rent according to the Pew Charitable Trust.
And when you get back after a long day of work, you'll likely be met with bills up the wazoo for doctor's visits, student loans, and utilities. So what's left of a paycheck after basic living expenses? And maybe not even those.
Well, according to the actual data that I could find, the monthly fuel uses Bureau of Labor Statistics data on average they could find is $20,748 a year. And also I would like to point out that people could have an extra money left over if they do better spending on their budget, such as no spending on alcohol or gambling, according to the bank rates.
What good are more jobs if those jobs barely pay enough to live on? And what good are lots of jobs if they cause so much stress and take up so much time that our lives are miserable?
Well, first off, what do you mean by a job that does not pay enough? A response to that would be a living wage. Well, that then begs the question, what is a living wage? Because if we were to eat a common George Stigler's diet, or in the Stigler diet, you eat enough cabbage, evaporated milk, dried navy beans, and beef liver to achieve the 1943 nutrition standards of the National Research Council, which would cost $2.45 a day or $76 a month. Should that be the living wage for food, for the minimal cost of food that could achieve the standards of nutrition? Also, the living wage is different among certain groups, like $50,000 would seem good for a single guy by himself compared to a mother of five. While his second point about jobs and stress, my argument would be that according to a survey by the Conference Board, job satisfaction hits an all-time high at 62.3%. Going back to the root of his argument, the problem with his argument would be compared to what? Why do people take the job if it is stressful? The reason is because it is the better alternative than any other choice, And also, the stress with a job is a bit subjective, since a person might like a job, but someone else might hate that job.
And don't tell me a good economy is measured by a roaring stock market if the richest 10% of Americans own more than 80% of it.
Well, the stock market is still an important measure of the economy since it tells us about firm performance or when a recession is coming. And also, people care about the stock market growth since a person would invest money into it and have their retirement funds in there.
And what good is a large gross domestic product if more and more of the total economy is going to the richest 1%?
Well, the data Reich cites is income before taxes and transfers. And if we add taxes and transfers into the data, the income inequality decreases.
In fact, what good is economic growth if the way we grow depends on fossil fuels that cause a climate crisis?
The fossil fuel industry represents 8% of GDP, and the United States is transitioning to nuclear power and renewable energy.
These standard measures, jobs, the stock market, the GDP, they don't show how our economy is really doing, who is doing well, or the quality of our lives. People who sit at their kitchen tables at night wondering how they're going to pay the bills, they don't say to themselves, well, at least corporate profits are at record levels. In fact, corporations have record profits, and CEOs are paid so much because they're squeezing more output from workers but paying lower wages. Over the past 40 years, productivity has grown nearly 4 times as fast as hourly pay. That's right, working Americans are getting paid less for being more productive than ever. Wish we could say the same about billionaires.
The first statistic on CEO pay being 399 times that of workers has problems. The CEOs they choose are from the Fortune 500 companies and only 17.5% of the United States workforce. If we look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the data is around 1 in 5 workers. The second statistic, the productivity pay gap graph, has been debunked by economist Robert Lawrence from the Peterson Institute. He has shown that if we include worker benefits and fix the narrow definition of worker and use a better inflation measurement, the gap significantly declines, and the cause of what's left of the gap could be due to automation.
At the same time, corporations are driving up the costs of everyday items people need because corporations are monopolizing their markets. They don't have to worry about competitors. A few giant corporations can easily coordinate price hikes and enjoy bigger profits. Just 4 firms control 85% of all beef, 66% of all pork, and 54% of all poultry production. Firms like Tyson have seen their profit margins skyrocket as they jack up prices higher than their costs, forcing consumers who are already stretched thin to pay even more. It's not just meat. Weak antitrust enforcement has allowed companies to become powerful enough to raise their prices across the entire food industry. It's the same story with household goods. Giant companies like Procter & Gamble, they blame their price hikes on increased costs, but their profit margins have soared to 25%. Hello? They care more about their bottom line than your bottom.
Well, there are some problems with this idea of businesses causing inflation because of them being greedy. One of the reasons is that businesses are already greedy. Did they decide to be extra greedy someday? And also, why are certain sectors of the economy experiencing more inflation and others less? Is it because they are less greedy? Another reason why greed inflation falls flat is because some economies experience deflation, and what's the cause for those prices to fall is because businesses were generous during that period. And also apply the greed inflation logic to other things. The cause of airplanes falling down the sky was because of gravity. When we look at expert opinion of the great inflation theory from an IGM survey from the University of Chicago, 79% of experts disagree with the great inflation, and economist David Uther pointed out the flaw of this logic by saying, I don't see the logic. U.S. markets have been concentrated for decades, but high inflation is less than 1 year old. What is causing inflation is too much money following the same amount of goods. After all, if you look at the Federal Reserve Economic Research, you can see in August 2019, $14.9 trillion, and in May 2023 is $20.6 trillion. So the true culprit of inflation was the Federal Reserve. The reason why markets are more concentrated is because of government regulation creating barriers to entry according to the National Bureau of Economic Research. The beef industry is highly inspected and has been blocked by a DOJ on the 2008 merger, and they have been highly concentrated for more than 25 years, while with the cattle prices, they have been driven by supply and demand, and if they were able to control prices, shouldn't they be gaining more investors? According to Microtrends, Tyson food profits have been increased profits, but not that massive, but the trend seems to decline a bit. When you look at Procter & Gamble, profit margins there, TTM debt margins biggest increase were a couple years ago, and then declined in pandemic and continued the trend before.
Meanwhile, parents and even grandparents like me are still struggling to feed their babies because of a national formula shortage. Why? Largely because the three companies that control the entire formula industry would rather pump money into stock buybacks than quality control at their factories.
The reason why there is massive concentration of baby formula is due to government programs of WIC, which rewards contracts for baby formula producers, and why baby formula shortage is so bad is because 98% of baby formula is consumed domestically is due to arbitrary FDA standards and high tariffs on foreign baby formula.
Traditionally, our economy's health is measured by the unemployment rate, job growth, the stock market, overall economic growth. But these don't reflect the everyday kitchen table economics that affect our lives the most. These measures don't show the real economy. Instead of looking just at the number of jobs, we need to look at the income earned from those jobs. And not the average income. I mean, people at the top always bring up the average. If Jeff Bezos walked into a bar with 100 average working people, the average wealth of each person would suddenly be over $1 billion. No, look here at the median income, half above, half below. And make sure it accounts for inflation, that is real purchasing power. Over the last few decades, the real median income has barely budged. This isn't economic success, it's economic failure with a capital F.
You should really use real median household income instead of real median personal income is because it skews the data downward too much because some jobs are part-time and some are not the main provider. And if we look at real median household income, it is $70,784 in 2021. That's the data that is available in the Federal Reserve of Economic Data.
And instead of looking at the stock market or the GDP, we need to look at who owns what, where the wealth really is. Over the last 40 years, wealth has concentrated more and more at the very top. Look at this. This is a problem, folks, because with wealth comes political power. Forget trickle-down economics. It's trickle-on.
According to a Yale study, if you include Social Security into the data, the wealth share of the top has not increased that much since 1989. While the political power thing, I would cite a study from the Journal of Law and Economics found that campaign contributions don't change the political opinions. Instead, it is more of donations matching politicians with similar interests. Another thing is that there's no such thing as trickle-down economics and it is a myth to make fun of free markets, and tax cuts have increased economic growth.
And instead of looking just at economic growth, we also need to look at what that growth is costing us. Subtract the costs of the climate crisis, the costs of bad health, the costs of no paid leave, and all the stresses on our lives that economic growth is demanding.
Well, the United States is switching to more renewable energy and nuclear power. What do you mean by bad health? That is incredibly vague. Are you talking about health outcomes? That is more of a cultural thing. On a paid leave, if he is talking about paid family leave, it would cause a decline of women in the workforce because it would be an extra burden for businesses. We don't need the government to pay for it. We could instead have mutual aid societies cover it. On the stress thing, compared to what? People do those jobs because they are better than the alternative of their skill level.
We need to look at the quality of our lives. all our lives. How many of us are adequately housed and clothed and fed? How many of our kids are getting a good education? How many of us live in safety or in fear? You want to measure economic success? Go to the kitchen tables of America.
A report by 2 economists have shown that when we look at poverty by what we consume, the poverty rate is less than 3%. If we do more of an international comparison, the data from the economists using the OECD, the bottom 10% of America beats the standard of living of countries like the bottom 10% of Switzerland, Germany, the OECD average, Britain, Poland, Japan, and France, and even the top 10% of Israel, Mexico, Turkey, Brazil, Portugal, and Russia. Another study from the Pew Research finds that adding the American definition of poverty to European countries makes the U.S. have similar or even higher standards to them. On education, yeah, government schools are not doing so well, even though they have been giving a lot more money. The answer to this is simply to have a more free market in education. After all, a study found that charter school pupils are more likely to graduate high school and have higher salaries than public school pupils. On his last point about whether people feel safe, my response is that that's a subjective idea. After all, crime has declined from 1993 to 2015, but people still think crime is still high. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and please donate to my Patreon so I could make more videos and have your video requests checkmated. And thanks for watching, and have a nice day.